All right. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. So we're just going to give it a couple more minutes, wait for people to trickle in, but welcome to everyone who has joined. So we'll start at about 10:05, just in case anyone wants to grab a drink, go to the bathroom. Um, And while we're waiting, feel free if you would like to just pop into the webinar chat. I'd love to know your name, maybe your role and where you're joining from, what company you're with. All right, I see someone commented attendee chat is disabled, so let me try to fix that as we wait for people to join. If we're not able to get that fixed, then just please go ahead and put your, okay, it looks like we're able to get it fixed. So if anyone wants to try and be my little guinea pig and try putting in something in the webinar chat. Okay, perfect. I see a message from Keenan. Thank you for that. We're just going to give it about a minute or so, but welcome to everyone who just joined. Thank you, Anil. Yeah, we're just putting in the webinar chat if you would like your name, your role, and where you're joining us from today, what company you're with. And we're just going to give it about another minute until we get started. But you should be able to both access the webinar chat now and also put any questions or comments you have in the Q&A box as well. I'm just waiting for the participants number to stabilize, and we'll get started. Hey, Max. Hi, Dorothy. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. Thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you for the folks who put their names in the chat. It's good to meet everyone. My name is Antara, and today we're going to be talking about how to use Port to automate observability, not just as a technical challenge, but as in organizational practice, especially since it's one of the critical parts of platform engineering. And hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be able to see how Port can enforce observability standards at a scale with much less toil. So quick intro for me. I actually come from the observability space. I am, of course, a solutions engineer now at Port, but I was an SE previously at New Relic and Elastic before that. And before that, I was in the consulting space working as a DevOps engineer, and I'm based out of Austin, Texas. So shout out if anyone here in the webinar is also in Austin. Um, but yeah, that's just a little bit about me. So agenda for today, what we're going to talk about. So we'll start off with a bit just of an introduction to observability. We'll talk a little bit about what the challenges are in the status quo and where our port can kind of help out. And then we'll go through a few specific use case examples and an overview of the implementation steps for those examples, and then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and Q&A. Definitely feel free to put your questions in the webinar chat or the Q&A as we go through the presentation. I will try my best to keep an eye on those. So yeah, let's kick it off. So we'll kick it off by starting, talking about why we need observability. I'd love to know just, what kind of observability tools people are using. So please feel free to drop in the chat what tools you use, and also if you have any monitoring tools that you have already integrated into Port. So yeah, just drop it in the chat. Very curious to know. Um, but as those of you who are using observability tools know, observability means more than just kind of the logs, metrics, traces, standard APM monitoring that we're all familiar with, that we can kind of see in this Datadog dashboard, right? It's more about understanding the state changes of your system over time. So why is this important, right? Because drift happens, right? Teams spin up services quickly, configurations drift apart, and observability helps you detect that drift and enforce consistent standards. It's really what kind of allows teams to improve operations, reduce blind spots, and increase confidence in their deployments. So love to see that we have Grafana, Splunk, and CloudWatch, it looks like. Again, definitely very curious to know if anyone has actually integrated their observability tools into Port, for those of you that are already using Port. But let's talk a little bit about what the challenge is today. So as systems kind of grow more complex, right, observability also becomes more difficult. So you're not just running a single monolith anymore, right? You've maybe got hundreds of microservices deployed across multiple environments, and then tool fragmentation can make that work as well, make that worse as well, right? Maybe one team uses Grafana, another prefers Datadog, and yet another relies on New Relic. So consolidating all this data into something meaningful can be difficult. And also, when we're spinning up a new service, maybe we forget to configure our observability monitoring, right? So suddenly you realize that a service is in production and you don't have any observability metrics coming out of it, right? And that is not a great situation to be in. So a lot of different challenges, not just with implementation, but also just with the overall landscape there. So that's really where Port comes in, right? Port is not an observability tool. It's like a portal that brings structure, automation, and context to your observability workflows that already exist. So you can kind of think of Port as the glue, right? It integrates with all these different tools that we see, but specifically with observability tools as well, right? Grafana, Dynatrace, New Relic, Datadog, whatever you're already using. And then it standardizes and automates observability so every new service is properly instrumented from day one. So these are the use cases that we'll be talking through today. So first, we'll kind of talk about how Port makes it easy to bootstrap observability into new services via self-service actions. Then we'll talk a little bit about how dashboards can be automated so that every service gets the right visualization um, and reduce kind of any manual effort it takes to get there. And then finally, we'll walk through coverage reporting. So how Port can kind of help you see which of your services are compliant with your organizational observability standards. And then we'll also discuss the impact on DevOps and platform teams, and then just finally wrap up with some key takeaways. All right, so kind of jumping in, first use case is bootstrapping, right? So imagine you're a developer, you're spinning up a new service or a new application, and in order to make sure that you have observability coverage on it, right, once it's up and running, you need to remember to add an agent, set up configuration, handle secrets, right? Do all of that. So with Port, all of that can be prepackaged into a self-service action. So as a developer, you just click a button and your new service will come with your observability configuration already baked in. And this ensures consistency, right? So whether you're using New Relic, Datadog, Dynatrace, every service gets standardized configuration right from the start, and it's not left up to the individual, developer to be responsible for. So let's talk about that first one, bootstrapping. What does the actual workflow look like? So first thing you're going to do is prepare your infrastructure templates. So this is where you would define which observability agent you want to collect each type of data from. So metrics, logs, traces, and then you would include any language or runtime specifications. So like as an example with New Relic, the APM agents are all language based. So this is where uh, you would choose and different. And then lastly, you would define where secrets, so where your API keys, where your license keys, where is all of that coming from? So that is all prepared through your infrastructure template. Then you're just going to create an IAC template that includes your application resources, so your service, compute, networking resources, your observability agent installation, and the environment configuration. And then finally, you're going to kind of wrap that IAC template and set up the Port self-service action backend, either using the Port UI or an automation UI where you parse the input, call the appropriate template, inject your secrets, and then finally deploy via CI/CD or your orchestration tool. So if you have any questions about that, please drop it in the chat. But hopefully, if you have set up a self-service action in Port before, this should feel kind of familiar to you. The only extra steps here is, of course, to include that observability configuration in your self-service action template. And then just, you want to ensure that you're taking your security precautions, so ensuring that your sensitive values, like your agent license or your API keys, are managed securely. And then once you register your new service and expose it to your developers, after you deploy, you want to make sure that you register the service and link its observability status to your portal by updating the service blueprint with those observability metrics. And we'll take a look in just a second at what that actually looks like in practice. All right, so here's a more concrete example. So you would create a self-service action in Port that, again, as a specific example, scaffolds a new service with New Relic instrumentation already set up. So the agent, the APM agent or the New Relic infrastructure agent will be installed as a step in your self-service action. And once it's running, in our example here on the screen, we have a default APM dashboard that is created via the New Relic UI API. And the dashboard link is added directly in Port. So again, in this example, we just have it so that you can see the dashboard itself within Port, or you can also just link it through directly to New Relic. So in this example, the developer would able to access and view this dashboard without ever having to even leave the portal. So they have everything available within Port. And this is kind of the self-service action flow that you're developer, your end user, whoever is responsible for spinning up a new service would actually go through to get that end state that we were looking at in the previous slide. So, they go in here, create a new self-service or trigger a new self-service action. Here, they're just choosing the service configuration for their new application, and they want to either toggle the New Relic APM agent to be on or off. You can configure it so that they have maybe this is a drop-down menu instead, and they can select different observability agents. So instead of just having New Relic APM agent, they would also have New Relic infrastructure agent. They might have the Datadog agent, the Dynatrace one agent. So you can have multiple options and kind of configure it the way that works for you and your organization. But that's kind of what the flow would look like for a developer. So as you can see, they're never being exposed to the back end. They don't actually have to go to New Relic and understand how to instrument their application. So we have a question in the chat. If I deploy my APM agent using some IAC that I've put together, Port can use that template. Yes, that is correct. All right, so let's move on to, let me pause this and move on to our next use case, which is about dashboards. So, your observability tools like Grafana and Dynatrace, they're very powerful, right? But let's be honest, right? Not everyone in your organization necessarily has access to these tools. And also, maybe not everyone wants to necessarily learn how to use another interface. But of course, these tools are super valuable, right? They have a wealth of important observability data. And the data that they collect is essential for troubleshooting and fixing bugs. But the challenge is to communicate only what's needed and leave out the rest, right? Depending on the responsibility of your different developers and different DevOps engineers. So Port is going to provide that abstraction layer for you. So it pulls in dashboard URLs so developers can view those observability insights directly in the portal. This kind of reduces that overall context switching and makes observability a little bit more accessible for everyone in your organization. So again, you can showcase those observability insights from dashboards while keeping more involved access into the actual observability tool, restricted to those who actually have the native observability login credentials, and also just those who are, actually going into your tool and looking at logs or looking at the specific APM data. But for those who only need to see dashboards, they can just do that through Port. So platform engineering best practices kind of encourage using Portal as the first place that your developers should go to understand and interact with their many tools, including those for observability. So it makes it a lot easier to integrate insights from multiple data sources. So rather than kind of expecting your developers to manually duplicate Dynatrace or Grafana dashboards in Port, or just switch between different tools to view them, you can automate dashboard creation and link to those tools from Port. So we're really it's observability that really meets your developers where they already are, not forcing them to go to a different tool to get that insight. So we'll kind of talk through the setup flow for that process. All right, so what you're going to do is start by defining your required service metadata in Port by adding them as fields to your service blueprint to support that dashboard creation. So that's what this first little picture is showing. It's that blueprint, right? Examples of metadata can include service name, environment, team owner, runtime or stack and tier. Again, all this is customizable, but this is just an example. So it really ensures that you have the necessary inputs to customize your observability dashboards. And then depending on the observability tool that you're using, you can then just prepare a baseline dashboard template that supports variables or parameters. This is going to differ based on the tool that you're using, right? The process is going to look different for every tool. And then you're going to create a Port automation, which triggers, you're going to create an automation trigger that fetches a new service's metadata when it's registered in Port. And then it calls the observability platform's API to create a dashboard. It'll inject that relevant metadata and then capture the generated dashboard URL. So that's an example of what the automation interface would look like. And then you're going to update the service blueprint and port with the dashboard URL as part of the entity's properties. And then now that the dashboard URL is stored in port as part of the service's metadata, you can add a link field or a custom component in port's UI to see the dashboard either directly in port, or you can just click through to the observability tool from port without having to switch context. So a concrete example of this, right? When a developer registers a new service in port, an automation will call the Dynatrace API to generate a dashboard and then link it in the port UI, as we can see here. So the automation will fetch any key metadata from the service entity that is used to dynamically create a dashboard in Dynatrace via its API. And then it's going to authenticate with Dynatrace, send a request to clone a template dashboard and replace any variables with the actual variables from port. And then once the dashboard is created, the Dynatrace API returns a unique dashboard URL, which will be visible in the service entity, which is what we see here in our slide. So now developers can see either the dashboard instantly within port, right? It would just be linked in a tab in this observability dashboard, or you can just include it as a URL as we see here, and they can click through into Dynatrace. So they're not having to log into Dynatrace and like find the relevant dashboard. It's already linked for them right here. All right, I'm seeing a question in the chat. Where can I check if my observability provider is supported? So I'm assuming by supported, you mean whether port has an integration with your observability provider. So you can check for that in our integrations doc, which I'm about to just drop in our chat. So this is our integrations index. It includes all of the out-of-the-box integrations that port supports. I'm just about to put it in our chat here. So yes, that's everything that port has out of the box. However, we can really connect to any tool, observability or otherwise, via a webhook or an API. The benefit of using an out-of-the-box integration is that we collect certain resources by default, but you can also always customize and collect more data than that or less data than that. You're able to kind of choose what information is ingested from your data source. And again, even if you don't find your observability provider in this integrations index list, we can connect to anything via webhook or API. Hopefully that makes sense, Adrian, but please let me know if you have a follow-up for that. All right, so why does this matter, right? Because consistency is key, right? Every service gets a dashboard and every developer knows where to find it. So this speeds up that debugging and troubleshooting process, right? No more kind of wasting times hunting through your tools. And more importantly, it lets developers just stay focused on building features, right? They're not setting up dashboards and then spending time looking for them so they can do what they do best. All right, so let's move on now to the third use case, which is coverage reporting. So we've talked a lot so far about our engineers and our developers, our DevOps engineers. But I want to talk a little bit about a use case that is more applicable for a team lead or a manager, right? Who have very different goals and day-to-days than your individual contributing engineers, right? So team leads want to know, do all my services have observability enabled? Or are alerts, metrics, and traces set up? Any team leads on the call, maybe, who can verify this, or I would love to hear if there are any kind of other metrics, observability related, of course, that you're looking for when you're kind of looking at all of your services or all of the teams that you're responsible for. I'd love to know like what kind of just insights you're looking for. So feel free to drop that in the chat. But really, they're looking for these things to kind of help with troubleshooting, but also to address quality standards and response times, right? For engineering managers, on the other hand, right, they're responsible for maintaining observability standards across their designated teams and services and have a vested interest in finding ways to automate and standardize this practice to ensure compliance. So Port's software catalog kind of solves both of those issues. So the catalog can be used to model observability coverage and present answers to questions like, does this service have alerts, metrics, traces, logs enabled in an observability tool? And then both team leads and engineering managers can use the catalog to visualize any gaps that exist in observability adoption across their teams and services. So that's what we'll talk about a little bit with this next use case. So let's kind of run through the steps to build a blueprint. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is check your integration status. So extend your service blueprint to include fields that represent the observability integration status. So those are the kind of fields that will track whether each observability component is present for a service. So things like are alerts enabled, are logs enabled, traces, metrics, etc. And then you're going to sync your integrations. So you're going to set up scripts to sync actual observability state into port by just querying your observability platform's APIs. So for example, in Dynatrace, I know that you can query the availability of certain services, metrics, and alerting rules, and then populate port entities with that information from Dynatrace. So next step, you're then going to create a custom view that's either grouped by team or by environment, right? Whatever makes sense for your organization. And then, you can see the individual metrics. You can see if alerts are enabled, if metrics are enabled. Certain teams may only have one or the other. And then you can apply filters on top of that information within port to highlight services missing overall observability coverage, a certain type of observability coverage, right? Again, whatever is important for your specific team or your organization as a whole, you can filter the information in that way. And then finally, you can use port scorecards, custom badges, or validation to flag any gaps that you're seeing in observability. So for example, if a service is in production and the observability flag here is false, you can automatically, show a warning flag or even block promotion of a service into production if observability is incomplete through port automations. So let's take a specific example for this. So you can create a real-time dashboard in port, kind of similar to this one, that highlights which services are not up to standards because they're missing metrics or traces or alerts from New Relic, right? And then to do that, you would kind of extend your service blueprint in port to include those Boolean flags for instrumentation status, broken down by the key observability components that we kind of saw previously, and then set up an automation or integration that would update the observability fields using port's API. And then to get a dashboard that looks like the one here, you would use port's entity view filtering to create a dashboard and kind of further enhance it. So this can look like adding any remediation actions or drill down links to the service metadata or owners or documentation. You could even add a Slack or email notification to alert team leads to non-instrumented services, right? So you can really not only just see what services do and do not have observability coverage, but even take action on top of that all through port. So it really gives you a live visualization of your observability coverage across your stack, along with the ability, again, to quickly identify, not just identify, but also address those gaps and reduce reliance on kind of ad hoc audits or manual reports. And you can kind of more proactively enforce observability in this way. I see a question in the chat. Is RBAC supported? Yes, it is. And I'd love to know, RBAC is supported in a lot of different types of ways. So I'd love to know specifically what kind of RBAC restrictions you're looking to apply in terms of kind of what pages and what dashboards import you want to surface to your users. You can certainly restrict that using RBAC. So, the dashboards and pages that are available to a team lead, you can make it so that your developers aren't able to access those. Similarly, for self-service actions, you can not only kind of restrict what actions are available to which users, but you can also restrict like the fields that they're able to select when they are triggering a self-service action. So we have a very kind of robust RBAC functionality. And again, it just kind of depends on what kind of restrictions you are looking to. Okay, so yeah, I see you said who can see what dashboards. You can most definitely restrict that at the user level, at the team level, or even by different personas. I see another question here. Can I just add the Datadog dashboard into the page for the actual service it is monitoring? Yes, you can embed the dashboard itself, or you can just put a URL that links to the dashboard. So you kind of have some options there. But either way, it really simplifies the process of your developer finding that dashboard, because either they can see it directly in port or you can link to it and they can just click through to directly to Datadog. All right, great, great questions. Feel free to keep firing away here. But we're gonna now move on to talking a little bit about the value for team leads and the value for managers. So for team leads, this kind of means less manual chasing, right? They're getting a live dashboard showing which services are instrumented and which are not, right? No more kind of spreadsheets or one-off audits. Coverage is tracked continuously. And then for managers, it's more about compliance and visibility. So they can see adoption trends, they can enforce standards and generate reports all automatically, which is especially powerful for regulated industries, right, where audit readiness is more crucial. All right, moving on to our last use case here, which we're just going to talk a little bit more generally about DevOps and where DevOps engineers come into this process. So typically, DevOps engineers are the ones who kind of own those infrastructure templates, right? Terraform, Helm charts, the CI/CD pipelines. So with Port, they're no longer spending time on repetitive tickets like things like, please add new relic to my service, right? Instead, they can enforce defaults through these templates, and Port makes sure that developers actually use them and are more self-sufficient. So you may be thinking, what are my DevOps engineers going to do now? But there's still a lot for them to do, even in a world without as many tickets, right? And that can include working with their platform engineers to ensure that the self-service action templates include default observability instrumentation and are also being used properly at scale. And also without needing to respond to ticket requests for commonly needed services, DevOps engineers can focus on core responsibilities like pipeline management and orchestration to improve and scale software delivery as a whole. They can also improve and build upon existing observability standards, while your platform teams will focus on auditing developers' compliance by ensuring that all their critical services actually have things like alerting and logging built in. So Port makes it easier to do all of this by aggregating data from multiple observability platforms and then correlating it with service criticality. So in turn, this makes it, again, easier to generate dashboards for compliance or reports showing coverage versus expectations. All right. So as an example of this, you can generate a weekly report. I hope it's not too small for people to see, but it's essentially showing which tier 1 services are missing log-based alerts in Datadog. So you can really see like the granularity here. So you would start again by just updating your service blueprint import to classify services and then track observability requirements like log alerting. And then you set up an automation that uses the Datadog API to query active log-based monitors and cross-reference them with the service names and IDs that are registered in port, which allows you to then flag any tier one services that do not have log alert coverage, right? So again, we're able to really drill down at a very granular level of coverage there. And then after the corresponding port entities logs and alert coverage fields are maybe updated accordingly, ports dashboards can be used to build a filtered report, such as the one that we're seeing on the screen right now. So now you have a live queryable list of all your critical services out of compliance, which can be delivered maybe as a weekly report in whatever format you choose, right? And then with a setup like this, your DevOps and compliance teams are gaining real-time visibility into their observability coverage, all from within port. So port really becomes a source of truth for both service criticality and instrumentation status, and makes compliance reporting more automated, accurate, and audit ready at all times. So this also kind of creates a healthy split of responsibilities with your different engineering teams, right? So your DevOps teams are responsible for building out those reusable templates. Your platform engineers are going to enforce adoption and compliance. And then finally, developers are able to just self-serve what they need when they need it without having to go and ask for it from your other engineering teams. So everyone kind of stays in their lane, and the system scales more easily. So let's talk a little bit about downstream benefits. So you're able to sort of get that compliance at scale, accurate reporting without any manual effort, and then audit-ready data also very easily. So instead of scrambling before an audit, you have a live queryable source of truth all within port. So again, port is really kind of acting as the control plane for your entire software development lifecycle. It's bringing all your observability metadata into a single unified service catalog. It's centralizing those workflows across teams, and ultimately creating this transparent, secure, and standardized workflow, all while reducing friction, not only for your developers, but your engineering team as a whole. And so let's talk a little bit about broader benefits, right? This isn't just about observability, right? Port can help automate and enforce standards across the entire software development lifecycle. It's secure by default and reduces the cognitive load on developers who no longer need to remember that additional step of configuring observability. And they go from being overwhelmed to just being happier and a lot more productive. So a couple key takeaways, if there's anything you take away from this webinar, observability is obviously too important to just be left to chance. It needs to be automated and it has to be enforced as a standard. And Port makes this process seamless and allows you to kind of bake observability into the workflow itself. So that way you get more consistency, compliance, and reliability without slowing teams down. And that kind of wraps it up. So thank you all so much for your time. I wanted to open it up for Q&A. Feel free to jump in the chat and add any questions you have. I hope that the session gave you some practical insights into how Port can actually transform your workflows in your organization. All the information that I covered today is actually was released in a blog post that was published this morning. So we were happy to send out the link for that today. But yeah, all of the steps, the implementation steps that I covered for the use cases are all going to be outlined in that blog post, along with screenshots and videos. So you can kind of follow those and implement some of those use cases in your own instances of Port if you would like. But yeah, I'm just gonna wait a couple more minutes if anyone has any questions before we end the webinar. All right, I see a question. What integration or approach will you use for documenting databases, tables, fields, and business rules? So I'm not entirely sure what we mean by this question. As far as documentation, I mean, we can, like I said earlier, kind of ingest in data from any custom source through webhook or API. Um, and kind of any data that you have, any databases, tables, fields, business rules, any metadata that you have about that can be ingested into Port and kind of visualized through a dashboard or in any custom way that you set it up. I'm not sure if that answers the question. All right, just gonna give it about another minute for questions, and then we're gonna end the webinar. I'll stop sharing my screen. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions come through, but thank you all again for joining today. I hope you learned something useful, and hopefully you can take a stab at implementing some of the use cases that we talked about today. Again, most of this information will be in a blog post, so feel free to reference it. And yeah, thank you all for joining.